Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Ayin Aleph Amud Beis, starting with Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph at the new Mishnah. Just like when it comes to Chatzeros, in order to then carry between a bayis and a Chatzer, the Chacham instituted Erev Chatzeros in order to enjoin all the batim together with this one Chatzer. So too, when you have Chatzeros that are entering into one Mavui, they also require Shituf Mevuos, so they can enjoin together into this one Mavui, allowing then carrying from the Chatzer to the Mavui or vice versa. Our Mishnah is discussing a case where you have three Chatzeros, and they want to enjoin into this one Mavui through Shituf Mevuos. The Mishnah is mechadesh a case that not only in the classical situation when one gives a food item, an oichel or a mashke, and each one then enjoins by putting that oichel and the mashke in a kli, in a safe place in one of the chatzeros or one of the batim. But over here, the Mishnah is mechadesh when Reuven, the balabayis, he goes ahead and makes a shituf mevuos on a pre-existing shutfis. For example, the Mishnah talks about now when Reuven and Shimon have a shutfis from a business deal before, and Reuven has a shutfis with Levi from a business deal before. The Mishnah is mechadesh that they can go ahead and use this shutfis for shituf mevuos. Says the Mishnah, Bal habayis haya shutaf l'shchenav. He already was a pre-existing shutaf with his shchenav, with the other chatzeros. Reuven has a shutfis with Shimon, and Reuven has a shutfis with Levi. Lezeh b'yayin. His shutfis with Shimon was with a chavis, a barrel of wine. His shutfis with Levi was also with a barrel of wine. Einon tzrichin la'are. They do not have to make a new shituf mevuos. So here we have a twofold chiddush. Number one, you can use the pre-existing shutfis for the shituf mevuos. You don't have to make a new shituf mevuos. And number two, that which Reuven had a shutfis with Shimon, and Reuven has a shutfis with Levi, is satisfactory to enjoin all three of them, even though Shimon and Levi do not have a shutfis. The Mishnah goes on to say, Lezeh b'yayin u'lezeh b'shemen. However, if the shutfis with one was with a chavis of yayin, while the other one was with a chavis of shemen, then tzrichin la'arev. They'd have to make a new shituf mevuos. You cannot rely on the previous shutfis and then use it now for shituf mevuos, since one was with wine and one was with shemen. Rabbi Shimon Oimer, echod zeh ve'echod zeh einon tzrichin la'arev. Both cases, says Rabbi Shimon, whether it's a situation of yayin and yayin or yayin and shemen, in both sinners you don't have to make a new shituf mevuos. Says the Gemara Amar Rav. Rav explains, ubekli echod. That which we're talking about over here that makes it a good shituf mevuos from a pre-existing shutfis is when it's in one kli. Omar Rave. Rave says we can medayek just like Rav was saying. Dekanami, diktani, because it states in our Mishnah, lezeh b'yayin u'lezeh b'shemen, tzrichin la'arif. The Tanna Kama says when it comes to yayin and shemen, you have to make a new mevuos, another sheet of mevuos. Iyamris b'shlam reisha b'kli echa v'seifa b'shnei kelim shapir. If you're going to say that the reisha, when it comes to yayin and yayin, is with one kli, and the latter part, the seifa of the Tanna Kama of a yayin and shemen, is with a different kli, then it's very well understood why when it comes to yayin, it will be a good shituf mevuos, whereas the yayin v'shemen will not then work to make a shituf mevuos, because it's with two kelim. Eli yamris reisha b'shnei kelim v'seif b'shnei kelim mali yayin v'shemen. What does it make a difference if it's yayin and yayin, or a shutfis of yayin and a shutfis of shemen? In other words, Rav, like Rav wants medayik, is saying that when it's all in one kli, whether it's yayin and yayin, or whether it's yayin and shemen, it will make a shituf for a previous shutfis, and you don't have to make a new shituf mevuos. You can use that for your shituf mevuos. But if it's with two kelim, not only if it's going to be yayin and shemen, but if it's yayin and yayin, it'll also then not be a valid sheet of mevois. That's how Rav wants a medayik from the Mishnah, just like Rava said. Omar le Abaye turns to Rava and he says, Yayin v'yayin roi la'arev. Yayin v'shemen ein roi la'arev. No, the distinction is that yayin, a shut with yayin and a shut with yayin, that itself, the contents, the yayin itself, can then make a chibur. They can mix together. Therefore, it can be a valid sheet of mevois. But when it comes to yayin and it comes to shemen, these are two things that do not mix together. So therefore, it's not dependent on one kli or two kalim, because that's not the determining factor. Because even if you have yayin and shemen in the same kli, it will not be valid. The point is that the yayin mixes with yayin, and the yayin doesn't mix with shemen. That's the machlokes between Abaye and Rava in this Mishnah, the way Rav explains. Rabbi Shimon Oimer, Echad zeh ve'echad zeh ein tzrichin la'ariv. Rabbi Shimon argues on the Tanakama, and he says that not only in the case with yayin and yayin can you rely upon the shutfus from before for your now shituf mevois, but even if it's going to be wine and oil, that also will be valid. Ask the Gemara, V'afilu lezeh beyayin lezeh b'shemen. Hooray! We just said before that the mitzias is that yayin and shemen do not mix. Since they do not mix, how can you go ahead and say this is a good shituf? After all, yayin and shemen are not going to be something that's me'urav. Says the Gemara, Omar Rabbi, you know what we're talking about over here? Not like we thought before, says Rabbah. What Rabbi Shimon is learning over here is not that there's one mavui, like we explained before, Reuven is mishatef with Shimon, with this mavui, and Reuven is mishatef with Levi. Three different chatzeros that are going to mishatef a sheet of mavui for one mavui. No. Over here, Rabbi explains we're talking about two mevuos. That means that Reuven is making a sheet of mavui with Shimon with one mavui, and Reuven is making a sheet of mavui with Levi in a separate mavui. So the way it's set up is you have Reuven in the middle. His chatzar is on one side, let's say, a mavui. On the other side is also mavui. And on either side of the mavui has another chatzar, one shel Shimon and one shel Levi. Omar Rabbi. Rabbi explains. Hacha b'may askinan b'chatzar shebein shnei mevuos. We're talking about Reuven's chatzar that is in between two mevuos. Rabbi Shimon letamei, and Rabbi Shimon explains according to his reasoning. This nan, it's stated in the Mishnah earlier. Omar Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon explained. He has a tzir when you have three different chatzeros, A, B, and C, and each one is opened up to the other one. That means A has an entrance to B, and C has an entrance to B. And each one also has an entrance to the Rishus HaRabim, so each one is independent. So, says Rabbi Shimon, Irvu shtayim hachitzoynis im ha'emtzois. The two outer chatzeros make an eruv with the inner one. That means A and C can make an eruv chatzeros with B, the one that's in the middle, in between them. Hi muteres imahem vehe mutares imah. That will allow the outer chatzeros to then metaltil a chayfetz from their chatzar to the inner chatzar, and vice versa. Ushtaim hachitzoynos asura zumzu. But the outer chatzeros, A and C, will not be able to then metalta one to the next. So therefore, so too over here. The way that Rabbi Shimon is learning, explains Rabbah, is that in our case, Reuven is making a sheet of mavui with Shimon, Gabe that mavui, and Reuven is making a sheet of mavui with Levi on a separate mavui. So therefore, Reuven and Shimon can go ahead and metaltil using that mavui to their chatzar, and Reuven and Levi can metaltil in the other mavui from their mavui to their chatzar. But each one, Shimon and Levi, will not be able to metaltil one to the next. They cannot go ahead and use that. Omar le Abaye. Abaye says, Midami. What's the comparison? How can you compare that situation, that what Rabbi Shimon said earlier, to this case over here? After all, Rabbi Shimon said over there that not only is it going to be, it's going to be valid, however, between the outer ones and the inner chatzeros, but he says the outer chatzeros will not be able to then use the outer chatzeros. Midami hasam kitoni shtayim achitzoinos asur zimzu. There it says the chatzer A and C cannot go ahead and be used one to the other one. They can only go out from the outer to the inner, and vice versa, but not from the outer to the outer. Whereas hocha kitoni ein tzrichin la'arev, which is mashma klal. Our Mishnah says you don't have to ma'arev. So here Abai explains that if it says you don't have to ma'arev, you don't have to make another shituv mavui, is mashma at all, which means to say he wants to understand that really Shimon and Levi can go ahead and use the chatzeros, the mavuos. So that's not true. According to this, right, if you're going to be consistent with Rabbi Shimon's case over there, just like the outer chatzeros cannot be used, so too over here you'd have to say the same thing, that they cannot be used, the ones who did not make an shitu mavoi together, Dahainu, Shimon and Levi. Answers Rabba, my ein tzrichin la'arev. What does it mean, ein tzrichin la'arev in the Mishnah? You don't have to make another shituv mavoi. It means shchenim bahadi balabayis. That means Reuven with Shimon and Reuven with Levi. They don't have to make a new shituf. They can use the pre-existing shutfus for their shituv mavuos. Aval shchenim bahadi hadodi tzrichin la'arev. But if Shimon and Levi, they want to then go ahead and use, then they will have to make a new shituv mavuos. They cannot rely on the previous one. That means they'd have to put let's say a loaf of bread, or they'd have to put something inside of the middle chutzner, Ruvain's chutzner, in order to then mishtatef and be using both mevuos. Now in the Gemara on Daf Ayin Aleph Amud Beis at the top, Rav Yosef now goes back to the pre-existing, the earlier understanding of our Mishnah that we're talking about indeed one mavui. We said that we have one mavui, Reuven has his chatzir, Shimon and Levi have their chatzeros, and they want to enjoin using a pre-existing shutfis. So Reuven has a pre-existing shutfis with Shimon, and Reuven has a pre-existing shutfis with Levi. In both of them, we say that you can go ahead and use, if it's, according to Tanakam at least, if it's Yayin v'Yayin, according to Rabbi Shimon, both Yayin and Shemin, to use that pre-existing shutfis with now the shituv mavui. Says Rav Yosef Omar, Rav Yosef explains, Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbanim beplukto, the Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri v'Rabbanim kamifli. What is their machlokes? Why does the Rabbanon maintain it can only be Yayin v'Yayin, whereas Rabbi Shimon says it can be Yayin v'Shemin? Disnan, Shemin shetzaf, al gabe Yayin, v'nogai tvul Yoyin b'Shemin, loy posel ella Shemin bilvad. We have a situation where you have Shemin that is floating on Yayin, and we have a situation where a Tvul Yom, that means somebody who already went and he was Toivel himself, but he has to wait till Herev Shemesh, until nightfall, to become Tohor. So he's in a status where he's still Tameh. If he were to touch Truma, he's Poisil the Truma. So here we're talking about Shemin and Yayin that are Truma, and the Shemin is Tzaf, it is floating on the Yayin. You have somebody who is a Tvul Yoim, who then puts his hand, his finger on the top, that means on the layer that is the Shemin. So it says over here that he's Poisil Es Hashemin Bilvad, according to the Tanakama, the Rabbanon, that he's only Poisil the Shemin, but not the Yayin. Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Oimer Shneim Chiburin Zelazeh. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says that they're both connected, and therefore when he is touching the Shemin, he's not only poisil the Shemin, he's also poisil the Yayin, because they're considered to be one entity. They're mixed together. Says the Gemara, that's our machlokas to them, we can explain. Rabbanon ki Rabbanon, Rabbi Shimon ki Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. The Rabbanon in our Mishnah then will go together like that Rabbanon. Just like the Rabbanon over there say that the two things, the Shemin and the Yayin, are not connected, and therefore the Tvul Yoim is only poisil the Shemin, but he's not poisil the Yayin. So too over here in our Mishnah, that the Rabbanan say you can only use a pre-existing shutfis for your sheet of mavoi if it's yayin and yayin, because they mischaber. But when it comes to yayin and shemen, they do not make a chibur, and therefore you cannot rely on that for your sheet of mavois. Whereas Rabbi Shimon, he holds like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, because Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says they are combined, and therefore when the Tful Yom touches the shemen, he's also not only poisel the shemen, but he's poisel the yayin, because it's mischaber, one to the next. So too, Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah would say like him, because in our Mishnah he says you can rely not only on a shituf that was done with yayin, but even when it was also done with shemen, the two shutfis can be used from a pre-existing shutfis to make your shituf mavui. Why? Because he holds that the yayin and the shemen are things that are mischaber.